amongst us.
Absolutely. Right. Morning. Welcome. Start of another week. Hope you ventured into nature this weekend, because I think today we're talking all about learning from nature, imitating nature. What can we get out of nature? Does nature give us? What is your nature? So yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting topic for me because as some of you know, I love nature. But even more interesting these days with all the developments and things that are happening around biomimicry. And that's not really the topic this morning, but it's closely allied, I think, to what we're chatting about. But at the end of the day, nature for me, love getting out into it. What do they say? You know, if you need a psychologist, just go into the bush or the wild or the open spaces for a couple of days, and it's probably the best mental health treatment you can get. I certainly believe that. Love getting out there. Anyway, Lee, yeah, nature. What's your nature?
Well, I'm not sure about my nature, but what I learned from nature, I think that was the sort of question that I've sort of been mulling over, and of course there are so many things. So just to bring it down to a few things. So the one thing that I am always amazed at is nature's way of adapting. And I say nature as a generic term, but actually there are some creatures that adapt better than others. And I think I've told the story of the lions in the Okavango Delta, that when the Delta floods, they have adapted to hunting in the troughs of water. So remembering that they're cats, remembering that they're nocturnal, and so they actually don't like water. Like all cats, they don't like water, and their natural tendency is to hunt at night. But during the floods, their normal prey, the felt animals, disappear. They go off, they migrate out of that area. So the only prey they have left are the buffalo. And buffalo sleep at night, and they sleep as a hunk. You know, you can't actually pick them off because they're literally hunkered down. And so what the lions do is they, and also they're huge. I mean, so how do you bring down these huge buffalo? So the lions drive the buffalo into the troughs of water, which then slows the buffalo down, and then they can start to pick off the weaker ones. So they actually use the water as a tool, as a method, and they've adapted to their environment. And it's the strength of lion. I mean, you find lion in every conceivable environment in the world: desert, forest, plains, and here, water. So that adaptability is something that I learned from nature. And then the other thing that I want to mention, and there might be other things, but the thing that strikes me is there's something compelling, as Ivan says, there's something compelling about wild animals in particular, and that I include I include birds in that. And you know, I've been into the bush many times, but there are moments there, and it is literally a moment. It can be 30 seconds. You see something, and it is riveted. I find it's riveted in my memory, and it could be years before, where when in my early days of going into my first visit into Kruger Park, drove through the gate, and there was a cheetah that just sort of slunk its way through the trees, and it was gone in a millisecond. I can picture that as if it was yesterday. And the other day we were sitting outside having lunch, and a brown-hooded kingfisher came and just, yeah, that's my brother's photograph of these lions hunting in the water. Amazing. This brown-hooded kingfisher just came and sat on a branch and honestly looked at me. And it sort of demanded attention. And it was thrilling. It was absolutely thrilling. It felt like I was connected to something so beautiful and amazing and wild. And so I want to read Gerard, just the first verse of Gerard Manley Hopkins' poem, Kingfishers Catch Fire. And it goes like this. As kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame, as tumbled over rim in roundy wells stones ring, like each tucked string tells, each hung bell's bow swung finds tongue to fling out broad its name. Each mortal thing does one thing and the same, deals out that being indoors, each one dwells. Selves, goes itself, myself it speaks and spells, crying, what I do is me, for that I came. And to me, that just, so what does nature teach me is be true to yourself. A kingfisher doesn't try and be anything else other than be its magnificent self in that moment. So that's my, some of the things nature teaches me.
Great, thanks, Lee. Yeah, some great imagery you brought up there, and as you said, you know, your brother's a pro wildlife photographer, and that was one of his great images. Just not a great quality version of it, but a snippet of what he does, which is also amazing. So, Jasper, what does nature mean to you?
Yes, morning. Yeah, it's interesting. It's a topic that I think all of us, in one way or another, relate to strongly. And when you said what the topic is, I could only visualize three settings. The one setting is in the bushveld, with you know, that sparse vegetation or good vegetation, but then in the evenings and during the day, my brother lives in Hammanskraal, and he's got game on his farm there. So when we go and visit, we take a game drive, but then it finishes off the evening. We're sitting around the campfire. So it's that almost the peace and the tranquility that comes from just be out in the bush, and the only noises you hear would be nature, and you have this enclosed community environment sitting around the campfire. So that gives peace to my soul. Then another one is sunsets, and you know, you can have an amazing sunset in the middle of the city, and you can have an amazing sunset in nature. And I just love the play of colors that happens, and you have a different sunset when it was a bit of a cloudy day, or it was raining, whether it was a dry day. And then especially over the sea, you have amazing sunsets. And then the other thing for me is then the sea itself, the waves. Just sitting there looking at it, and just look at that endless energy of wave after wave after wave coming in, crashing, the next one is on its way. And I watch documentaries of nature, of sea creatures, but when you just look at it from the surface, you have to imagine the abundance of life that's happening under the waves. But yeah, so for me, it's almost just like Ivan said, when he needs to see a psychiatrist, he goes to the bush, So for me, it's a bit of that as well. A fire. Now, even if you can't go to the bush, a fire at home is also a nice thing just to sit around and somehow bring you closer to nature. But I'll leave it at that.
Great, thanks, Jasper. All right, Edward. I know you're a nature man, so
yeah, it's interesting when Lee sort of raised the top subject. What can we learn from nature? I thought it was quite simple. The answer is nothing, because being a cynic, we think we know it all, and I come from, surprisingly, one of the least biodiverse countries in the world, because we've killed most of our nature in the UK, and then we expect other countries not to kill theirs. You know, we moan about the people in the Amazon cutting the rainforest down to make a living, selling us the stuff that we buy, and we moan at them for. But anyhow, I'm not a cynic. I'm a critic. I believe we can change. I believe we can improve. And actually, when Lee first mentioned the topic of nature, my first thought was Ecclesiastes 3. And I'm not religious, but I think I've mentioned before, my grandfather was a vicar. So I grew up with quotes from the Bible. And the great thing about Granddad was, whatever you quoted, he could find the opposite quote in the Bible. So I always know there's something in the Bible to support what I want to say. So it's a great source for me of reference. And if you know Ecclesiastes 3, it starts off, for everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. And it goes on a bit. And then it says, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. Great advice for COVID times, really, if you think about it. And it also says a time to keep silent and a time to speak. I've never quite mastered the keep silent bit. And if you think about trees, say the mighty oak or the majestic beech, both quintessentially English trees, they understand these rules of nature and the timing of things. In summer, when the sun's bright, they have masses of leaves. And these are little factories that used sunlight to turn carbon in the air into solid matter. You know, amazing. They've been doing it for millions of years. We can't quite master that technology yet. And those leaves are also the engine that drives the distribution system, drawing water up from the soil and nutrients and distributing it throughout the whole tree. And the tree knows that when it grows, it's got to grow both parts at the same time. The root system's got to develop at roughly the same time as the stuff above the soil, because it's got to have that distribution system working well. The roots have got to deliver what the plant needs. And I think we often forget that as people, and, you know, businesses will get the sort of sales going, but forget the production has got to keep, you know, going as well, or whatever it is. Or maybe they've expanded massively and they forget they've got to invest in the back office infrastructure. But trees have been around for millennia, or whatever it is. They've been around a long time. And they've also learned that in the winter, the wind blows stronger, and all those leaves offer a great deal of resistance. And of course, they don't need them in the winter because the sun's not very strong. They could make some, you know, they could grow a bit, but not a lot, because the sun's not very strong, especially in the northern hemisphere where we are. So they shed those leaves, and it means that when the wind blows, they don't get blown over. And of course, in the winter, the soil's not as strong at holding it because it's wet and yields. So they've learned that there's a bigger cycle as well, and a bigger reason to behave like that. And a tree lasts forever. and it's always in balance, but also it's flexible. When the wind blows, it bends with it. And without its leaves, it's much more able to weather the storms. And we've perhaps not experienced those storms yet. We've only been on this earth a very short time, and we've learned how to abuse nature, and we haven't yet kind of seen her wrath in a way. And we're going to experience that pretty soon, I think, with climate change, because we've ignored that. And yeah, that's kind of, and we've ignored those patterns, those rhythms. You know, now if it's 24/7, 365. If you want a Big Mac in the middle of the night, you can go and get a Big Mac in the middle of the night. And are we any happier because we've lost that rhythm? Because we can have whatever we want, whenever we want it? We want a strawberry in the middle of winter, we can have a strawberry in the winter. Whatever cost that is to the environment of growing it in the winter or shipping it in winter. So I think we've lost the joy that comes with living with the seasons. And it's really interesting what a few other people say, because I suddenly thought, you know, we've lost our appreciation of diversity. You know, if you judge a fish by the way it climbs a tree, you don't think a fish is very clever. And we look at people, and because they can't do what we can do, or they're different from us, we condemn them. And then I think also what Jasper said about the oceans. I love the oceans. I go and look at the sea, and it's always different. But what he said about we don't appreciate the abundance that's underneath. And I think that's the same when we look at people, when we look at communities. We just see the surface. We don't see the abundance underneath. So I think those are the lessons we can learn from nature. But I think by the time we learn them, it'll be too late and we won't be here because we've destroyed nature. And nature's the only thing that keeps us alive. If trees gave you a Wi-Fi signal, we'd probably treasure them more than the fact they give us the oxygen we breathe. That's my thoughts.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, I think we need to study the wood wide web. You heard about the wood wide web, the mycelial network underneath the forest floor. Right, Leo, over to you on that note.
Yes, when I gave this topic a little bit of thought, my first thought was the sunset over the ocean, as I enjoy many of those from here, and listening to the waves. You know, Jasper's already talked about that, so I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is reflect on a lesson that I learned from nature, which was when the tsunami, when was it, 10 years ago, hit and killed 250,000 people. And for me, it probably was a turning point in my life, in that around me, because around me, you know, I'm surrounded. I went to Bible college, so I've been surrounded by strong Christian views. There was a strong view that God was judging a people for not believing in Christ. And I wrestled with that for weeks. You know, why would God judge a people and wipe them out? You know, it just seemed way too cruel for me to grasp. And I think the turning point came for me when I realized that if we're going to talk about God, we talk about his creation, and then we talk about tectonic plates and the movement of tectonic plates. And when tectonic plates move, tsunamis happen, and they happen indiscriminately. And it's not God's judgment of any people group wiping them out. And it changed my view in terms of the narrow-minded judgmentalness of God that we have put onto God. And it changed my beliefs in that kind of creator, and it caused a huge challenge within me in terms of my taught faith, and I think when we look at nature and we see what nature does and how nature acts, that these things happen because of the way our world is created, rather than as some arbitrary judgment of somebody who is displeased with somebody else. We move from that, and I wrestle with even how to talk about it because of variety of beliefs, and I have probably in myself become much more inclusive and move towards, if we're going to talk about God, we must talk about him or her as a loving God rather than as a judgmental God. Anyway, so for me, that incident of nature created in my own life a traumatic event which shifted my way forward into inclusivity, which I think is a much better philosophy than a judgmental, narrow-minded, we are the only ones that are right philosophy. So yeah, that's my little contribution for today in terms of the lessons from nature. It goes much deeper than that, but I don't want to bring that out. It was just putting a lesson from nature for me into the group. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Leo. Yeah, I think it is interesting, and I think there've been a number of different perspectives this morning on what we can learn from nature, and I think for me it's the first word that actually comes to mind is harmony and balance. If we can learn some of those elements, things always work together. I think in nature, they're designed to work together when they're left undisturbed by us. That is, they're actually designed to work in a specific way, and when one thing happens, another thing changes as a result of that. That sort of ebb and flow, that balance, that give and take of nature. So for me, it's really about that. I mean, one thing that came to mind as people were talking, I don't know why it came to mind, but it is something that I find fascinating about the way humans have developed on this planet. And Ed sort of touched on it, saying we've only been here for such a short period of time, where the rest of nature has evolved over millennia. And that is, when there's a scarcity in nature, when there's a scarcity of food, a scarcity of water, nature contains itself. It reduces. It pulls back. It doesn't reproduce. Whereas humans seem to have completely the opposite challenge. Where there's scarcity, where there's poverty, where there's hunger, we seem to continue to reproduce and do it, perhaps even at a higher frequency than we do where there's an abundance. And so for me, there's this complete opposite almost that's taking place in our cycles as people. And I think that's something we really need to get back to and perhaps rediscover from nature. I don't know if it's a question of learning it from nature, because I think the early generations of humans did live in harmony with nature. They did subsist. They moved with the seasons. They moved with the times. They moved with the food supplies. They adapted, and I think as we've become smarter in inverted commas, and I think sometimes it's really a case of becoming dumber while we get smarter. We've gone against all of that. We've changed all of that. We've created artificial environments. We've created artificial food supplies. We've created artificial ways of sustaining life and so on, and it's brought us to where we are right now. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting topic for me as to why we've done that, and how we've lost that connection with nature, that ability to be in harmony. And I think As Ed said, if the human species is going to survive beyond the few 100,000 years that we've been around, depending on which philosophy you believe in, we're going to have to get back to that. We're going to have to learn to contain ourselves, to get back in sync with what nature wants us to do, because ultimately nature will win one way or the other. I have no doubts about that. Whether it's, we've destroyed it to a point where, everything collapses and is unable to sustain at least our form of life any longer, some other form of life will emerge, but it won't be us. And it will reestablish and it will take over again, and a cycle will begin. So the question is, are we smart enough? Have we learned enough to adapt fast enough? I'm not sure. Time will tell. But yeah, those are my thoughts. So Lee, back over to you and see what might be on the cards for tomorrow.
I don't really know what about tomorrow, but I just, as you were talking, Ivan, I just was reminded, I know we've already touched on it, but one of the things that's absolutely amazing and fascinating to me about nature is the incredible variety and that there's life in even what seems the most inhospitable places. And so in the darkest depths of the ocean, where we haven't even been able to go yet, but we've been able to maybe send down a probe, there are these weird creatures, with these lamps and big awful mouths that keep opening so they can take with it, and they're eating something which is alive, that exists down there, or in an abandoned cave. That you see these salamanders that have blind salamanders. I mean, in fact, there's a salamander that's not just blind, it's now evolved to the point where it has no eyes. It just simply isn't required in that environment. And it just reminded me as well of a biologist who was asked to, after his life's work, what have you learned from nature? What have you learned about nature? And he said, God has an inordinate love of bugs. There are more, and you'll love that, Ivan. There are more insects in the world than any other species and so it's just incredible. So I think maybe what I'd like, as we're talking, I think what comes to mind is the word wonder. And I think that is a quality that perhaps what quality is it? It's a
mindset. It's a mindset.
A mindset. And I'm wondering whether wonder has somehow got lost, and how we can restore and appreciate wonder as a practice. So let's talk about wonder tomorrow.
Thanks, Lee. Yeah, so sorry?
WONDR.
So we're going, www tomorrow, so where wonder went.
I wanted to go walkabout.
You can go walkabout too if you want, so long as you wonder about the wonder about the wonder.
you wonder while you're wandering. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, have a great day further, folks, and we'll see you tomorrow. Wonder about it. In the meantime, cheers.
Thanks, guys. Bye.